Okay, welcome everyone. Give folks a moment to arrive in the virtual space. All right. Good to see folks. I am Jamie Strauss-Clark, facilitator for, this is the Crisis Response Improvement Strategy Committee meeting for July. Very nice to see our committee and our community members and guests. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to take a few brief moments to go over our usual housekeeping items, how we use this technology, how we contribute in meetings, and so on. And then we will dive right into our I know you're not going to be at all surprised if you've been in any of these meetings, another very action-packed agenda. First, I want to mention we have ASL interpreters today. You should see them pinned on your screen, Melissa and Amber, and they will be trading off, I believe, every 15 minutes, trading with each other. So they should be on your screen if you need this assistance today. Actually, we'll put up the slides so I can remind everyone about how the Zoom works. Thank you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is controlling the slides today. All right, so I have two slides, one for our committee members and one for our guests and community members who are here today. This is the one for committee members. And Elizabeth, if you could just hit the arrow to advance, I've got little animations here. So if everyone can please keep your mics on mute unless you're speaking, that will help prevent us from talking over each other. And then if everyone on the CRIS committee, if it's available to you, if you could have the video camera on for as much of the meeting as possible, that just helps with our engagement with each other. I understand if your actual internet bandwidth or your personal bandwidth, you need to have your video off today, totally understand. But if it's available to you, please turn it on as much as you can. We use the raise the hand function to engage so that we, again, avoid talking over each other. So when you want to raise your hand, click on that reactions button the arrow is pointing to, and then hit again, Elizabeth. That pops up a window and click raise your hand. And I will call on you in the order in which I see your hands up. As I've mentioned to you before, if you have something to say and you forget where that button is, just feel free to wave your hands and I will look for you. Also, if you're participating by phone, CRIS committee members, I think it's hit *9 and that should raise your hand for you. Chat, if you have any technical issues, you can chat with Brittany Thompson. And she will try to help you work out with technical issues. If you are contributing, and this is for CRIS committee members, if you want to contribute a comment or ask a question in written form rather than verbal, you may use the chat to me, Jamie Strauss-Clark, and I will check the chat every little bit and look for any contributions from CRIS committee members. I'm going to ask during CRIS discussions, though, that it's only CRIS committee members who are raising their hands or staff who are participating, and only CRIS committee members who are putting things in the chat. I will have a really hard time facilitating if I'm also getting a lot of chats or hand raises from community members and guests. There's one exception to that, and we'll get to that in just a moment. If you could advance the button, Elizabeth. If you'd like to see as many CRIS committee members as possible, click on that speaker view and then click gallery, and that will put all of our faces on the screen. I think that's it. If you want to advance to the next one. All right, this is for members of the public, guests. Thank you as ever for the time that you put into attending these meetings. It is so appreciated and so important. For our community members and guests, please keep your mics on mute, again, so that we avoid background noise and interruption. And I'm gonna ask you to keep your video cameras off, not because I don't want to see you, but because we have 37 CRIS committee members plus staff, and I need to be able to see them in order to facilitate that conversation. We will have a conversation in the main room during breakouts, and that will be your opportunity to turn on your video camera and participate. You may turn on the speaker view and turn on gallery if you want to see as many CRIS committee members as possible. All right, and last, I just want to talk about the public comment. we have had some changes in which parts of the Public Meetings Act that there were some rules that had been suspended during COVID, and those rules are now back in place. So as you might have noticed, we're no longer doing the meeting registration and the online sign up for public comment. Today, as ever, we always reserve the last 20 minutes of the meeting for public comment. If you, members of the community, would like to make a comment at the end of the meeting, please send a chat to Nicola Pinson, and she will be collecting names in the order that she gets them, and I will call on those names at the end of the meeting to make public comment. Depending on how many names we get on the list, comments will be either 90 seconds or 2 minutes. And that's just so we can get as many of those comments in as possible. If you need some accommodation, if 90 seconds or 2 minutes would not work for you, if you have a condition or a situation where you would need a little bit longer, please let us know, and I will do when you send that chat, and I will do my best to address that. When we get closer to the end of the meeting, I will put the other guidelines for public comment up on the screen before we dive into public comment. But for now, for community members and guests, if you would like to make a comment, again, please send a chat to Nicola Pinson, and she'll be collecting those names so that we can call on you at the end of the meeting. That's the last 20 minutes of the meeting. All right, I think that's it for housekeeping. So let's dive into our meeting objectives. Actually, before we do that, Elizabeth, if you could stop the share. I would like to turn it over to Representative Tina Orwall to offer some words of welcome.
Good afternoon. Tina Orwall, State Rep from the 33rd. This is an exciting week. July 16th is when 988 launches. And of course, launch means it's the beginning, it's the starting point of what's going to be an incredible building of a crisis system in our state. And so I want to start by saying thank you. I want to thank all the CRIS committee members. You have been part of this process and you're helping to shape it. And we know there's some critical next steps, right? We have all three components from the outreach, the call centers, and of course the crisis alternatives. And so I also want to thank all the families, the public, everyone that's weighing in. You know, this is a process. And so it's in the summer. I know people are busy. So thank you for being here. And I just feel like we're part of history that's in the making, right? We're really doing something that is going to live long beyond us, and hopefully is a way to make sure that all of us, when we're experiencing a behavioral health crisis, or our families will get the help that they need. So thank you for this work, and it's an exciting week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Orwall. And now I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Waterland, who's going to offer our land acknowledgement today.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Representative Orwall. I think Saturday is a big day for all of us, right? And true to form, why wouldn't we introduce something huge on a Saturday, right? Just a nice weekend. But I am here to do something that I did 9 months ago, and I think a check-in in between. But the 9 months is important, and I'll tell you why. So today, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from my home in Tacoma, Washington. As I did 9 months ago, wanted to tell you that my house sits on the land of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup tribe have been stewards of this land since time immemorial and are still here today. Just as their ancestors did, they live, work, raise their children, take care of their community, and practice their traditional ways, all on these lands. Now, 9 months ago, on October 12th of 2021, we were at a CRIS meeting, and I announced that on October 11th of 2021 marked the first time that a US president officially recognized Indigenous Peoples Day. So 9 months later, wanted to reiterate and reconfirm the first time a sitting US president officially recognized Indigenous Peoples Day was October 11th of 2021. I still realize, as I did 9 months ago, that neither designating a day as a federally recognized day nor giving a land acknowledgement before a meeting even comes close to repairing the harm or the hurt done to Indigenous people. But as I said 9 months ago, and is still true today, this really gives me a chance to reflect on my ancestors' historical involvements, on my current place in continuing to benefit from the struggle, from the lands taken, and from the boarding schools that children of Indigenous people were forced to attend, and the violence that was endured. Today, I commit to continuing to educate myself, to being a partner, and to being a positive steward of the lands, and to lifting the voices of Indigenous people in order to right injustices and correct inaccuracies in the telling and remembering of the history of those who were here before me. So just a reminder, 9 months ago, we were talking about this recognition, and I come today again. Thank you so much for the honor of doing the land acknowledgement. And I just want to let folks know, committed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Really appreciate that. Before we dive into our meeting objectives today and how we're going to proceed through the meeting, I do have the pleasure of introducing a new CRIS committee member. So Anna, I'm going to do my very best to pronounce your last name correctly, but please do correct me if I get it wrong. Nepomuceno is joining us as the new Director of Public Policy for NAMI. And Anna, I'm going to turn over to you to give yourself offer a brief introduction.
Hi, my name is Anna Nepomuceno, and I am the new Director of Public Policy for NAMI Washington. I just started a little over a week ago on July 1st. And so right now I am in the learning process and just taking everything in. And I'm excited to join you all today at my first CRIS meeting. Just a little background about myself. I live in Tacoma, Washington, and I previously served as a legislative assistant for 4.5 years in the state legislature for Representative Jake Fye. And before that, I was a student lobbyist for University of Washington, Tacoma for 2 sessions. So I'm really excited to be back in advocacy, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Anna Nepomuceno, thank you so much for being with us, and we're grateful to have you. And I will be following up to do, we do one-on-one onboardings with our new CRIS committee members, so I'll be following up with you directly. But I really appreciate you jumping in the deep end with us today, so thank you. Let's put those slides back up, and I will walk you through how our agenda is going to go today. And actually, while we were still on introductions and we're getting those slides up, CRIS committee members, if you could, when you speak today, just preface any comments or questions when you speak today with your name and agency and role, and that way all the other folks participating in the meeting today and Anna can get to know who you are. Okay, so today we're going to focus on, first of all, understanding where we've been, where we are now, and where we are going in the CRIS process. This is a practice that we're going to start doing now through all of our meetings, just to make sure we're all grounded in this, in where we are in our process. We have a lot of updates to share with you on state agency activities relevant to the CRIS committee. And then our discussion today is going to focus on our understanding of current state of crisis response in Washington, best practices, and then getting your feedback on the missing pieces we still need to address to achieve the vision that we all agreed upon months back for the crisis response system. We'll confirm action items and next steps, and then use, as I said, the last 20 minutes of the meeting for public comment. If you could advance the slide, Elizabeth. So here's the timing we're aiming for here. We're just wrapping up this welcome introductions and review meeting agenda, and then we're going to dive into our personal story. And that's always something we start our meetings with to ground us in the work that we're doing together. We're going to do some brief updates at 3:40, and then quite a lot of attention to setting the table for our discussion later. And we're going to go through information about the current state and best practices. We have a lot of presenters today, so bear with us. I know there's a lot of prep material that went out for you too, so a lot of information to take in. We're going to take a short break at 4:50 and then come back and move into breakout rooms to discuss what's still missing. Then we'll move into action items and next steps at 5:35, and our public comment period will start at 5:38 with some instructions, and then move into those 20 minutes of public comment and adjourn at dinner time, 6 o'clock. All right, if you can advance that slide. Elizabeth. So as I said, and I apologize if your screen is too small to read these, we can make sure this is also something that you get either on the website or via email. This is the CRIS committee decision process, and I want to ground us in that HMA created. I want to ground us in where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So back in our February meeting, we worked out our work plan, that high-level work plan with objectives, and that was something that was developed with CRIS input. In March, we focused on centering equity and how we're going to do that. What are the specific ways we're going to do that in our work? And those have been incorporated into the high-level work plan and infused in everything the subcommittees do and all of our work. In May, we developed, or that was actually the vision work group, ad hoc work group developed, and then we refined, provided input on, and affirmed the vision and guiding principles for crisis response improvement. Here's where we are today with this yellow. Today is when we're going to focus on input to expand or new crisis system services to achieve Washington's vision based on our understanding of current services in Washington and crisis system best practices. That's all going to feed into our conversation in September, where we articulate a roadmap to achieve the vision for Washington's crisis response system, inform our process for developing budget recommendations for next year, and review the Section 109 technical and operational plan. In November is when we're going to start working on that next draft progress report, and then our final progress report in December. So that's where we are, where we've been, and where we're going. I think that's it for this, this piece right here. So now I'd like to move us into our personal stories. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Kashi to make the introduction, but I just want to remind everyone why why CRIS committee members requested that we do these personal stories. So way back when we first started, several CRIS committee members said it would be really, really important to start meetings with stories from people with lived experience, both to represent the diversity of experiences people have with the crisis response system, and to motivate us and remind us about why we do this work and why we're so committed to it. So today, Kashi is going to introduce our speaker. I have heard from Bipasha that this is a particularly inspiring human who's going to be speaking with us today. So I'm really appreciative, and I'm going to turn it over to Kashi to make the introduction.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Kashi Aurora, she, her pronouns, from Seattle Children's. I represent the state's Child and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group on this CRIS committee. And Jamie, you shared some of what I was going to touch on, so thank you for doing that. No, it was perfect. Thank you for doing it. Part of the reason we start with a personal story and a lived experience is to ground us all in why we do this work. And I think in addition to that, it's a way of holding ourselves accountable to the change our community wants to see from us. This was an articulated part of our vision statement, and I'm very grateful that we do this. Bipasha and I spoke about wanting a youth or a young person to share their experience, and I just want to recognize and appreciate the vulnerability and courage it always takes to share your personal story in a space like this. And I think there's an extra level of that when you're a young person. So I am especially grateful to Javi for being willing to share her story with us today. And it is both my professional and personal honor to introduce Javi Barria Opitz. Javi is now a young adult, and as a teenager, she experienced a mental health crisis, which resulted in an admission to Seattle Children's inpatient psych unit. This was part of a long journey of mental health recovery for Javi and her family, and I'm going to let her tell her own story, but I'm going to highlight a few things that she might not highlight about herself. She has powerfully shared her story in other forums to advocate for improving mental health services and policies, and is a fierce advocate for reducing mental health stigma. She was one of the 2019 recipients of Senator Patty Murray's Golden Tennis Shoe Awards. And in addition to working full-time and being a student, she serves as a youth representative on the state's Child and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group. When I figure out how to add hours in the day, I'll be asking Javi how she does that. I know she likes to find joy in the little things, skiing with friends, hiking with her dog Parker, and has recently taken up trying to teach Parker how to paddleboard. So I'll be very interested to see how that goes. Javi, thank you for being here, and thank you for being willing to share your story with CRIS committee.
Thank you, Kashi. Hi, everyone. My name is Javi Baria. I go by she, her pronouns. And I guess I'll just kind of jump right into it. So, for me, I moved to Seattle when I was 7 years old, and I went to a small school. I kind of always felt had trouble making friends, but it wasn't really till middle school when my mental health really started deteriorating. I started scratching my hands raw, and I had a lot of anxiety, and I didn't really know how to cope with it. I remember feeling like I had all these emotions inside me, and like I was just going to kind of explode because I just didn't know how to handle them. Eventually that kind of culminated in, I don't know if that's the right word, but I went on an 8th grade trip, and I had my first major panic attack, I would say there. And I just kind of want to, and the reason I mention that is because I don't blame or resent any of the way my teachers kind of handled my behavior as I started displaying more and more anxious behavior and depressive behavior. I think it was just they didn't have the resources to know how to help me. And so in 8th grade was my first ER trip to an emergency room in Washington, D.C. And I was across the country from my parents, didn't really know where I was. But that was kind of when I first started realizing, like, okay, something here needs to change. I'm not fine. Regardless of how many times I would tell myself that, it was kind of the first, like, something's going on here. When I went to high school, I made some small changes, but still kind of kept building on that plate. And then when January 10th, 2013, I was at my high school, and all of a sudden I disassociated. Thought I was back in Washington, D.C., and could not snap back out of it. I was rushed to Seattle Children's Hospital, and as Kashi said, taken to their inpatient psychiatric unit, where I spent the next 3 months, followed by about over a year and a half at Child Study and Treatment Center in Tacoma. Once I was discharged, let me back up a bit. I spent a lot of time in the hospital the first time, and I think as I slowly started getting better and recovering my memory, I slowly started recognizing where I was, recognizing my parents, recognizing my sister again. But as I recovered my memory, all those repressed feelings, all those repressed emotions that I had never learned how to deal with in my life started becoming more and more on display. And so I had a really hard time. I was very depressed, very anxious. But eventually I was able to go home about 612 days after I was admitted to Seattle Children's. And the reason I bring up, and I just kind of glossed over that, is that for me, it was kind of the crises that I had after I was discharged were the ones that were kind of the ones that have stuck with me to this day. I remember a call where I called 911 because I didn't feel safe. And I was asked, well, do you want me to call a hotline for you? And I felt I was in crisis, and they're asking me what to do. And so it was kind of a moment for me where I just kind of had hoped I call this one number and they can send me help. They can know what to do. And I wasn't met with that time. And so I'm very excited to hear about this launch of 988. Hopefully it can help a lot of people. I've always kind of been the type of person I like to share my story. And I started sharing my story once I was discharged and in high school because I just felt like it seemed to be helping other people. And in an almost selfish way, I don't know if selfish is the right word, but it helped me learn to cope with my trauma and like what I had been through. And just learning to talk about it was in of itself became a coping skill. Like as I'm talking about it right now, I'm coping with it. I'm thinking about my past and these difficult moments in my life, but I'm able to process it in a healthy way. I'm able to talk about them in a healthy way. So for me, it was kind of like a win-win when I started advocacy or getting into the advocacy world seemed to be helping other people. And I noticed it was helping me. And I think that's the thing with sharing stories is, when I share my story, it's never a moment where I'm expecting other people to share their story. It's never a moment where I'm even asking them to share their story if they're comfortable. It's just like, I'm going to share my story. I hope it resonates with you, at least some aspect. And if anything, I feel that I am an example of what the right tools and the right resources and, you know, support can lead to. As Kashi said, I work full time. I'm still a student. I'm chipping away at school, but I've found the proper balance in my life that allows me to have majority good days. And, you know, that's the thing with mental health and behavioral health, is that it's a lifelong journey, right? It's never, as much as I wish, as much as probably almost everyone in this meeting wishes, there's no one magic pill that will solve this. But it can get manageable. I always kind of say, the highs get higher and longer, like happy times, and the lows get shorter, less often, and they become more manageable. You learn how to manage that. And I think that's what my goal has always been, is like, how can we make sure that everyone has the chance to be where I am today? And I'll just kind of end with this one. I don't know, sorry, I don't know if I'm over time, but I'll end with this one story, is that when I was in the hospital the first time, there was a staff member, and she had a little tattoo that just said hope. So I was like, oh, that's a nice tattoo one day. And she said, thanks, it's an acronym. And it is an acronym that I have taken with me to Washington, D.C. to meet with members of Congress. I have taken it to, as Kashi said, Senator Murray's Golden Tennis Shoes Awards. I take it with me every single day. And that is that hope. Hold on, pain ends. So thank you for letting me share my story today. Thank you for the work you are doing. We see it, we notice it. It means the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Javi. I get emotional every time I hear you speak, and I promised that I was not going to do that. And here we are. Thank you for sharing your story, for lending your voice to this work, for being here, and for the call to action that you have provided for us, right? How can we make sure that everyone has a chance to be where you are today? Thank you for being here.
Javi. I spoke to you yesterday for the first time, and I've been thinking about you all evening. You know, I reached out to you also on social media. And I will echo what Kashi said. You must live in a parallel universe where there are more hours in the day, because I can barely keep up with half of what you do. So thank you for, you know, despite working full-time, being a student, being a community advocate, and just living your life with your dogs and going paddleboarding and skiing, making the time to come and share your story. I'm a person with lived experiences, you know, and I also work on the crisis line. I've talked to people like you and your families, and I can imagine what it must have been like when you were in that initial phase, and how frightening it might have been for you and your family. I'm really grateful, like you said, you got some help, and that you were able to move from that place to a place of being able to share your story, which, as you said, that, you know, initially you were like, oh, I shouldn't do it, but you realize how much it helps people open up and share their story, and it empowers people when we don't feel shame, when we realize we're not alone. But this is the step you've taken past even the personal empowerment, which is come to the powers that be and say, what are you going to do to make change? What are you going to do so that more people get the kind of support I got? I get support, better support than I got. And the truth, Javi, is, you know, life can be challenging. Any one of us, you and I, or any one of us here on this call, can find ourselves in a difficult place again. So if any of us were to re-enter the system, we want to know that the system will be there for us. And if we don't change systems, there's only so much individuals can do, but we are here to hold the system accountable. And thank you for being part of that with me, with all of us. I appreciate it. Love you lots. Thanks, Javi.
Thank you for having me, everyone.
Javi, I don't know what to say other than I echo everything that Kashi and Bipasha just said, and thank you so much. These stories are really, really important to the work that this group is doing here, and I am grateful for you coming today, for sharing your story, for advocating, and grateful to Kashi for connecting you with us. So hope our paths cross again. Let's move now into updates from, we have a few updates, actually with lots of updates today, but for this segment, a few updates that are relevant to the CRIS. I'm just gonna let you know the order we're gonna go in. Beth Mizushima from Department of Health is gonna provide an update on that launch of the 988 line that Representative Orwell mentioned at the beginning. And then Levi, Michelle, and Jan are going to give us some updates on what's happening at the call centers. And then I've got an update for you from the governor's office. And then we'll check in and see if there's any questions or comments from the CRIS on any of these updates. So let's start with Beth, please.
And hi, Jamie, it's Michelle. I'm actually doing the updates for DOH.
Oh, okay, thanks, Michelle.
Sorry about that confusion.
No, no worries.
Everybody, Michelle Roberts. I represent Department of Health on the CRIS. So welcome, Anna and Javi. Thank you so much for sharing your story and bringing that hope for all of us today. And I think I've got a couple slides. I don't know if we could get those. You might as well go just straight till 10, please. Okay, so yeah, it's here. It's a really incredible week. So feeling super excited to say that the launch of the 988 3-digit dialing code goes live on Saturday, on the 16th. So this has been, this one is really the first visible sign, I think, of all the work we're doing together as CRIS, but it really is a vision for how, as a nation, we can do better work to support families in crisis or those who are supporting families in crisis. So, and really what it means is that that 3-digit dialing code will work to connect you to the existing National Suicide Prevention Lifeline call centers. And we have 3 in the state. I think we've shared before, you have to be certified nationally to be a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And the existing 1-800 numbers will stay, but it will be easy, one stop, easier to remember to get to those services. So we're really excited for that. And I know you're going to hear from the 3 crisis centers, but I cannot say enough about how hard they have worked to be ready to go live. They're going to share more about details about the preparation and readiness, but I just hope the 3 here, people who you're going to hear from today, recognize their leadership. And I hope their staff know that they are really at the center of changing how work happens and this incredible opportunity to better serve families. And they'll share a little more, but they've all been really incredibly busy hiring staff and getting them trained and making them ready. In the weeks ahead, we're going to be doing a lot to continue to assess and build, what's going on with calls, how's call volume, do we have staffed at the right times, or do we need to make adjustments? So all kinds of things that are going to be rapid quality improvement as we continue to roll out. Just a couple of things, actually go back to that last slide, just I want to call out just to make sure there's several things that don't change with this transition, including right now, there's no change to processes for a designated crisis response or mobile crisis teams or our local regional crisis services. That stuff we'll continue to talk about here at the CRIS table, but for right now, nothing changes from those other processes and relationships. And same things with work with 911. All the call centers have relationships with local 911 and have a process to hand off. So we'll continue to working together to look for what improvements need to happen over time, but nothing major is changing with those relationships with 911. So next slide. I think we shared some of this via email with you last week, or at least with CRIS members, but there is a ton of information out there to support the communications and outreach around this 988 dial code going live. So thanks to everybody who's giving us feedback, and Healthcare Authority and the Governor's Office are our partners on this, kind of from the executive branch. So we have a 988 webpage that is live, includes all kind of information about what's happening. It includes frequently asked questions. It's got background on our 3 call centers and lots of other resources. Right now, the webpage is translated into Spanish, Russian, and Vietnamese, and additional translations continuing to come after July 16th. We have a few on that webpage. You can find a few kind of one-pager handouts about the system for a few different audiences, including first responders, partners or legislators or stakeholders, and for the general public. So if you have people asking questions about 988, you can go pull those kind of one-page fact sheets out and share. We also have some social media and communication toolkits that has content that any of you or your agencies can use to share information about 988 and the launch. And so we've been starting to communicate in our own DOH social media channels, so you can watch for that and amplify anything there. We're also doing a joint press release later this week with HHS and the Governor's Office. So that will start on, look for that stuff on July 15th and 16th. And then we are working, this is an early heads up for a potential in-person recognition event with Governor Inslee and Secretary Shaw and other partners we'll work to invite later on this month. So many more details to come, but getting that in motion. So lots of communication resources. And I think one more slide. The last thing I just want to touch on is the Native and Strong Lifeline. So that's incredible work that's happened in partnership with our tribal nations and the American Indian Health Commission and others to create the first in the nation Native and Strong Lifeline, which will have staff specifically trained to support tribal members who are seeking 988 services. And so that's really exciting. Everything is ready to go behind the scenes. And we have one more critical step we're working to figure out, and that is working with the national partners to figure out the routing. So people will have an option, a dial pad option, like press 2 type of option to get to the Native and Strong Lifeline here in Washington. So I don't have a final timeline updated on that, but we're working to get that figured out this week so we can be clear about when later this summer that will be implemented. But incredible planning and training and hiring behind the scenes to set that up. And then as the last bullet on here, really just continuing to highlight that there is a lot of interest nationally as everybody's watching our Native and Strong hotline being the first in the nation and thinking about what it could be as a model for other states and National Suicide Prevention Lifeline as a whole. So those are my highlights, Jamie.
Thank you, Michelle. I think we'll have Jan Levi and Michelle share some quick updates from the call centers, and then if there's some time, we can take questions from CRIS members. So I'll go in alphabetical order, first name alphabetical order. So Jan, would you like to kick it off?
Thank you. In terms of updates for our call center, we have, because we wanted more challenges, on the 7th of July, we implemented NICE in Contact. And this is a product that helps us to be able to extract data related to calls and staff performance. So using this product, we will be able to retrieve information such as when do we receive the most calls? How many calls are answered per agent? Where are calls coming from, etc. So we feel like it'll give us a good amount of information that we can use to do further planning with. We have, currently we have 8 vacancies and 2 vacancies for our supervisors. When we're fully staffed, we have 6 full-time supervisors, 21 full-time staff, and 9 part-time on-call staff. So we are still recruiting heavily and trying to get all of our positions filled. We have been using interns, and unfortunately, there comes a time when they have to leave us. And so that has been part of our issue in terms of having some vacancies. But since April, we have hired 10 new staff members who are in different stages of their training. We also hired our first remote worker who happens to live on the west side of the state. We continue to meet our deliverables, and we are working on our electronic medical record system here at Frontier so that we can record services from the calls that are coming into 988 so that we can extract data from that as well.
Thanks, Jan. Appreciate the update. And Chris Committee members, again, if you could just, before you start speaking, just introduce yourself and the organization you're with, that'll help Anna and our members or our guests and community members get to know you better. So Levi.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. And hello, everyone. Levi Van Dyke, Senior Director of Behavioral Health at Volunteers of America, Western Washington. And yeah, I really appreciate highlighting the Native and Strong Lifeline, Michelle. So very exciting work happening there. Actually, just prior to the CRIS Committee, our staff, in partnership with the American Indian Health Commission and HCA, were presenting to some representatives from the state of Alaska on the Native and Strong Lifeline. So super excited about all of the work that's happening right now in conjunction with that to decrease barriers to Indigenous residents in Washington state. And that in conjunction with 988, just really excited, think about all the planning and things that have happened over the past couple of years, and now we're just a few days away. So, I shared in another meeting this morning, we've hired 76 new staff just related to 988 positions. Until like last week, I don't even think that had really sunk in with me. So just very exciting, and that's to cover phone volume as well as text and chat, because on the 16th, not only is there the transition from the Lifeline to the 3-digit 988 access, but we'll also have access to text through 988 beginning on the 16th. And we've had a history of providing national backup for Vibrant and the Lifeline for text and chat. And on the 16th, we actually will now have two different basically routing options for text and chat. So any residents that are identified, and they'll be using zip code for text and chat to help route, will get to go into that Washington only line, and we're excited about that. Staff are excited to get going. So, overall feeling really good, and we'll see what happens on Saturday. So,
thanks, Levi, and then Michelle McDaniel.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Michelle McDaniel. I'm the CEO of Crisis Connections. And so we have been answering the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline for about a dozen years, and we pick up for King County area codes. Prior to the opportunity to expand and to have this dedicated funding, as folks know, being a NSPL call center didn't come with any dedicated funding. So we have been embedding our work around answering this line with our existing regional crisis lines. So with this opportunity, we've been able to build out our specific 988 team. So we, with that, have hired 35 out of 37 positions we have open. Like everyone else that's shared, that's really been one of the biggest lifts, is just making sure that we have the workforce. A couple of those positions we have hired out of state. Texas, I believe, and Virginia. And because our team is operating remote, we're able to do that. So we feel very, very good about that. And on July 5th, we actually decoupled the NSPL line from the existing regional line that we answer. So they have been operating in a soft launch on their own. And as I mentioned before, we haven't had funding dedicated before to really staff up for the calls for the NSPL. Now having this team Our answer rates have gone to about 50% for our call center. And of course, if they're not answered at our call center, they get rerouted. We're now between a 92 and 96% answer rate. So that is really a testament of what all this work that everybody has been done, all the legislation, all the advocacy. We are really seeing that come to fruition now already before Saturday. So we have very few gaps in our hiring at the moment, knock on wood. A couple areas we struggle a little bit more are the master's level clinicians. And then we're still struggling to find qualified peer support folks, which also may be a reflection more of that has not been an area of emphasis in the state yet around the importance of people with lived experience being in that peer role. So, but we're optimistic that we'll be able to fill that eventually. A couple other things to mention. We have asked the team about any significant learnings, concerns since we've done the soft launch. It's really been quite smooth. And one of the things we've heard over and over is just the opportunity for this to be a remote opportunity for folks has really been great for particularly people who are working outside of kind of the Western Washington area as well. So, so Jan, anything we can do as well to help you around in your staffing, we'd be happy to. And that underscores as well what a real opportunity and pleasure this has been to work collaboratively with the other call centers, with Adam and other folks around 911. This whole ramp up has been a heavy lift, but it's also been really incredible in developing new relationships and strengthening relationships, at least from perspective of my team. Last thing I'll mention is that there is a lot of attention, obviously, nationally on 988. But specifically HHS Secretary Becerra, who has been doing a national tour, mental health tour for the last few months. Many of you know did a stop in Seattle and stopped at Crisis Connections. Several of you were at that event. In fact, Bipasha and Kasha spoke. And so Secretary Becerra had remembered that visit, and he specifically asked me to represent the 988 CEOs across the country at an event, short event on Monday for a national launch of 988. So I will be representing all of you and be able to share from the CEO perspective, the operational level of what 988 means and how we've gotten here and what's happened. And also to show off the fact that we have some significant things that we've done in Washington State, including obviously the big one, passing the 1477 legislation with the funding attached to it, but also really something outstanding again that was mentioned before, which is the Tribal Hub, the Native and Strong Lifeline. So I'll be reaching out to a couple of folks to make sure that I've got some good talking points around that. But I think it's just a real honor and testament that we were asked as Washington State, me specifically, to represent all of this work. And so that'll be Monday, noon Pacific time. And I hope to be able to make sure that everybody gets an invitation to that 30-minute kickoff. So that's my update.
Perfect. Big thank yous to Jan, Levi, and Michelle for all of the great work you're doing and for providing these updates today. A big thank you to you, Michelle Roberts, for your thorough update on where we are. I have a quick announcement, and then we're going to have to move into the next part of our agenda. So, CRIS committee members, if you do have questions based on the updates today, if you could, I think probably the best thing to do would be email them to Nicola, and we'll compile them and work on getting those answered for you. I'm sorry that we don't have enough time to take questions now. The one announcement I wanted to make is Megan Celadonia, who I think you met at the May CRIS committee meeting, she's with the governor's office. She partners with Amber leaders on this work. And Megan is going to take over Amber's role as the governor's office representative to the CRIS committee. Amber's going to remain a voting member of the steering committee, but they're both going to be attending the meetings and working together in partnership. Megan, anything to add to that I missed?
No, you summarized it well. Thank you, Jamie. We just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that you'd probably see both of us on camera and participating, but that we would continue to work together and try to split up the work the way it makes sense to. So thank you.
Great. All right. So let's move into our current state and best practices discussion happening next. And Elizabeth, if you could put the slide deck back up and put it on that vision slide. All right. No, yeah, perfect. Okay, so a reminder, everyone, we have a vision now for crisis response improvement. This was approved by our steering committee at the May meeting, represents a great amount of work by our ad hoc vision work group and tremendous contributions from the CRIS committee and subcommittee. So here is that vision again. We're gonna be referencing this throughout all of our CRIS work because we should always be grounded in this. So wanted to start with this. Actually, I should mention something before I start. Betsy Jones was originally going to be setting this stage, the context for this conversation. She unfortunately has gotten COVID and she is at home recovering and is kind of having a rough day. So forgive me, I'm going to do my very best to channel Betsy, but it's really, there's no one who can replace Betsy. So at any rate, just wanted to remind everyone of this vision and also wanted to remind you of that high-level work plan. You received a handout with the high-level work plan and the progress on each of those items that was distributed to you via email from Nicola. This is a reflection of the significant amount of work that is currently underway to reach objectives and this vision. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, do take a look and catch up on what's been done since you came up with that work plan. And then if you could advance the slide. All right, so I know you saw this one before, but I just want to remind you. So today we are going to be hearing some presentations on the current state and also best practices, including Representative Orwell is going to share some outcomes from that Arizona trip that we talked about a little bit at the May meeting. And then the plan is for you to have some discussion today about what is still missing based on what you understand about the current state and what you understand about best practices. And all of that is going to feed into that September discussion where we'll engage in a deeper evaluation of best practices for mobile crisis teams and crisis stabilization with the objective of articulating a roadmap to achieve the vision for a crisis response system. So again, today we're going to lay that foundation for that work by gaining a deeper understanding of the current state and starting the discussion about what elements we need to add to this roadmap. So I'm going to turn it over now to Mark Podrzak. I apologize, Mark, if I butchered your last name there. I know you said it to me before and my brain just keeps going one way from HMA. And he's going to present some key takeaways from Medicaid claims and encounter data to help the CRIS committee understand the current system utilization. Mark?
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you all. And I'd like to first extend appreciation to the Behavioral Health Administrative Service Organizations, or BHASOs, as well as the Healthcare Authority, who we work together on validating and confirming the data that's available today. So my focus, there's 3 different presentations in this session. I'm going to spend about 14-15 minutes on the data aspect, i.e. what do we know today about who's receiving crisis services and where might there be some gaps, with the idea that if we're thinking about future outcome measures or metrics, and also the cost estimating to deliver to the government and the legislature, what might we need to still collect? So the next slide, one more. So from the data sources themselves, up on the left-hand side, you can see in the green, there's data on all clients who receive crisis services, and that's housed at the behavioral health ASOs. So be mindful that there's 10 different regional ASOs, and they're collecting information on the regional crisis lines. That's the first brown box, the mobile teams that have been dispatched, as well as the designated crisis responders that are being dispatched for the involuntary treatment investigations. So that's for all individuals in the state. But then for Medicaid specifically, in the bottom yellow box, it's those same services in addition the crisis stabilization services as well. That's in one database for Medicaid only. Next slide, please. So there's pros and cons to both databases. For the BHASOs, of course, the pro is that we know about all individuals in the state. The con is that it's in 10 different locations from a data storage. And also, there is information collected at the regional level and some information, whether it be by age group or race or ethnicity. but it's unknown exactly how complete all that data is at each of the 10 database locations. For HCA at the bottom, they do have all that information at that level of granularity to better understand who's receiving services. But again, it's only for those enrolled in Medicaid. Next slide. So the data that I want to share with you today is to help inform the report that will be delivered Jan 1, 2023 on the cost estimates to help determine what it will take to build an integrated behavioral health crisis response and suicide prevention system, as well as to look out where there might be opportunities to provide a more equitable distribution of resources to deliver these services, and then any recommendations around the allocation of funding responsibilities across different payers, whether that be Medicaid, managed care organizations, or commercial payers, or the BHASO themselves. These are all items that are targeted that the steering committee must report on as part of the legislation. So as Jamie said in the September meeting, we are going to talk more about the framework about this cost estimating process, but today I wanted to just show you what we know today, where there are some data limitations, and maybe some ideas about how we can use this data for our future work. Next slide, please. So on the BHASO data first, next slide, which is all payers. So we looked at information over 3 years, but we found for various reasons that the most reliable and complete data is the period thus far for July 1, 2020 to June 30 of 2021. We will certainly report on more recent information, but since the most recent state year of June 30, 2022 just ended, we wanted to give you a full picture of a full year. So there are over 380,000 calls to the regional lines. This is not the National Suicide Prevention line, but the regional lines. And you can see that about 93% of those calls were answered live within 30 seconds and about 2% were abandoned. Statewide, there were over 55,000 mobile teams dispatched. And when you do that on a per 1,000 resident basis, that's about 7 dispatches per 1,000. As opposed to the designated crisis responders, there were over 30,000 of those in the 12-month period. And that's at a rate of about 4 investigations per 1,000. So together, we're looking at about 11 dispatches per 1,000. And for the ITAs, or the Involuntary Treatment Act investigation, about half of the time, the investigation resulted in a detention. On the next slide. So if you look at the graph on the far left, you can see the overall, that rate per 1,000 of 7 dispatches for mobile teams and about 4 ITA investigations. That's all the ASOs combined, but you can see at the regional level, it varies quite a bit. So the line going across in blue and orange is the statewide average. And then you can see at the regional level who's above or below the line. And there really could be a number of different reasons for that. And I think those need to be further explored. One could be just that the modality or the approach to delivery has a higher mobile team or ITA use in some regions than in others. It could be that maybe some regions have lower use just because the staffing wasn't there to deliver the service. It's not that there isn't the need, but there was just no one there to deliver it. And then another possibility could be that there's other services available in some regions that are of a more preventative nature that helps to reduce the need for the number of mobile teams because some issues were dealt with before that point. Or more likely, it's all of these things combined. So that's really what the work ahead is, to try and understand the nuance around A, why is there variation today? And B, what is the need within each region, even if it's not being met today? Next slide, please. I did want to point out that even though we are not looking at the most recent 12 months that just passed, there is additional information that is being tracked by the HCA, and that'll be reported on in the future. One is on the turnaround time. So at the moment, the report that's available, that's being collected, is the percentage of turnaround times within 2 hours which are defined as emergent, and within 24 hours, which are defined as urgent. And then also for ITA investigations, how often those are being done via telehealth. And then further on the ITA investigations, is the client, the primary diagnosis of the client related more to a mental health concern or a substance use disorder? So obviously all of this information will be informative for future planning and resource needs and allocations. But I also want to point out that it appears that there could also be new elements besides these that will further inform the process that might be necessary as well. Next slide. So on the Medicaid side, I just want to point out that about 1 in 4 individuals that do live in Washington, 22% are enrolled in Apple Health. And you can see at the regional level, which is the different colors on the map, that percentage, it does vary, i.e. the Western side, it's a higher proportion of individuals on Medicaid. So when we're looking at the data in the next few slides, just keep in mind that, you know, it's not quite the same proportion across the state. Next slide, please. So this is just a reminder again about what we can look at with the Medicaid data. So for example, we can look at mobile teams or ITAs or calls to the regional call lines for those presenting with a mental health primary diagnosis or a substance use disorder diagnosis. We can look at it at the region level, which we have. We can look at it by these age groups in pink, which we also have done. We can look at it by race, ethnicity, and in the brown boxes, those are the available options to us for race, ethnicity views. Next slide, please. So 2% at the top there of the total Medicaid enrollments, over 34,000 individuals during this 12-month period we looked at who were on Medicaid received a mobile crisis service or an ITA investigation. Starting on the left-hand side, that all Medicaid in red is the 2%, and you can see at the regional level, again, there's differences. So some of the regions that were high on the previous slide are high again here, like Great Rivers, and others less so, because the first slide was all populations, and this is just the Medicaid population. But then on the right-hand side, on the upper box, you can see for the adult population anyway, it is hovering between around 2 and 3% by the different age groups we looked at. And we also looked at adolescents, that age 11 to 19, and it's a little bit less there. That could be more so because there's need and just not availability of resources than anything. And then when we looked at the race ethnicity subpopulations available to us, you could see that the American Indian, Alaska Native population is using these services at a much higher rate than other groups. So my interpretation here is that it just seems that more investigation is warranted to determine, could there be underreporting for certain groups, whether by race, ethnicity, or age, or even by region. And we still need to get to what is the actual need. This is just telling us what was delivered, not necessarily what is actually needed. And so that's the next slide. We can advance. We did look, before there, we did want to look at follow-up services. So for these same individuals, when you look in the box, the first line says mobile crisis services. So of all the people on Medicaid who received a mobile crisis service, we stratified them to look and see what percentage received another mental health related services within the next day. And about 33% of them did. That's the gray part. And then when we took it out to 7 days, it's more like half, 53%. And then if we took it out 30 days, which includes the green, it's about 61%, but that's telling us about 4 out of 10 of these individuals, we have no record of any other follow-up service. And then for the ITA investigation, for those individuals, the follow-up, you could see is higher. It's about 45%. And then, but then when we get out to 30 days, it's about the same as those that received the mobile crisis. So again, about 4 in 10, we have no evidence of a follow-up service after the ITA investigation. And probably what's more concerning is those that had an emergency department visit for either mental health or SUD. Fewer of them had the follow-up either within 1 day, 7 days, or 30 days. So the follow-up seems warrants some attention as well. It's not just the mobile team and the immediate crisis stabilization, but the follow-up as well. Next slide, please. So we are working to try and find ways, and this is where we would like some feedback from all of you in the breakout, is how can we measure unmet need? So the way you read this chart is if we look at the first line for the mobile crisis service, so there was about 28,500 individuals. Of those individuals, about 35% of them had one mobile team service in the year. But another 30% had 2 or 3 mobile team services, and then 13% in green had 4 or 5, and about 1 in 5 individuals had more than 5. So it's not just the number of people that received the services, but how much service they actually needed. So I think of the unmet need as both the number of people and then the amount of service as well. And then you can see fewer of those with an ITA investigation had multiple services in the year. About 70% just had one, and about 95% had 2 or 3, 1, 2, or 3. So when we also looked in Medicaid anyway, those that had primary diagnoses for mental health or substance use disorder, we found in this time period 106,000 individuals. So 34,000 of them had a mobile crisis service or an ITA investigation, but 106,000 had diagnoses that indicates at some point they could. So the question is really is, when we're looking at unmet need, where does it fall in that spectrum between 34,000 and 106,000? And I don't want to dismiss that there could be other people out there that have received no services for mental health or substance use disorder that do have a need for them, and they don't even appear in the data yet. So there could be even those beyond the 106,000. And let me just close out here. Next slide, please. Crisis stabilization. So when we looked at the service rate of that, it's quite low. About 7% of those who had a mobile crisis service had crisis stabilization as it is coded in the data. 5% of those with an ITA investigation had crisis stabilization, and only about 3% who presented in the ED. That's my timer saying my time's almost up. And part of the indication of that is simply because, as you can see on the map, there are gaps in coverage for this service throughout the state. The circle represents a 30-mile radius, so anybody that's outside of the circle, there's no providers at the moment. Next slide, please. So our initial assessment, the first one, item 1, is that we do need some more consistency in the coding of these services and what they mean and how they're reported. And item 2 is that, as you saw from the data we do have, and yes, there's more data being collected today, but some things that are still missing that might be of interest is the location where the service was rendered, the response time at more granular level than 2 hours and 24 hours. Where are there available crisis stabilization beds or chairs? What type of service was done as a follow-up? Was a follow-up appointment scheduled for the next day? And if it was, did the client follow through? So these are the types of information that will help evolve the estimating of need and the cost to deliver those in the future. And then one more slide. This one does get a bit busy, but we just wanted to show you graphically on the left-hand side, as Jamie said, in the July to November period, starting at the bottom, in September, we're going to give you a roadmap of how to build the cost estimate, and that'll be refined in the November meeting for you to review. But it appears that some type of work group might be needed to help define these outcome measures and the targets for how we build out that estimate based on what you saw today. And then the right-hand side is simply an example of a way you could think about it. And I think of it as like a stair step. Like here, this is just for illustrative purposes. but let's say the funding was delivered out in 3 phases. And certainly the pace that it could, if there's more funding, we could advance to phase 1 and 2 right away, or maybe just do phase 1 and then phase 2 and then phase 3. And we could create milestones, if you will. So as you saw in Medicaid, about 2% of the individuals had a mobile team service. So maybe in phase 1, the funding allows for about 4% of the individuals to access mobile teams. And then we make sure we cover that, and then more crisis stabilization services. So say 20% of those with a mobile team could receive crisis stabilization. Right now, it's only 7%. And then same with the follow-up. You saw that the follow-up needed improvement. And then kind of cycle through the services in phase 1 as a minimum target. And then phase 2, make the outcomes stronger. So instead of 4% of mobile team, it's 7%, then 10%. So it grows over time, but it's not that any one aspect of the continuum is being left behind. We're carrying all the services along to some degree along the way. So none of this has been finalized. This is just a concept, but we wanted to kind of introduce the idea of a process flow and ask the committee for feedback in the breakout about how we might go about doing this to present to you in September. So thank you for your time. Sorry, I went a little over.
Thanks, Mark. Up next, I think we're going to have Matt Gower from HCA to present some key takeaways from the pre-recordings that were shared with you. Before we do that, Chris committee members, I sent a chat to you asking you to send me questions that you have about these presentations in the chat. I've reserved a few minutes at the end of all of these presentations, 15 minutes to do Q&A. Hopefully we won't eat into those too much, but I'm tracking all your questions and we'll try to get as many answered as we can. If not, we will do some follow-up with Mark and team to make sure that your questions do get answered. So feel free to keep sending me those. This is just for Chris committee members, sending me those questions and comments, and I will keep tracking them. Matt, you take it away.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you to the Chris Committee for having me here this afternoon. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Matthew Gower. I'm the Crisis System Team Lead. My team produced a couple of recordings that are available on the Chris website. And if you haven't seen them yet, I highly recommend looking at them. They gave a great in-depth overview of the models and pieces that we are trying to implement for the crisis services. So I'm going to kind of assume that you have seen them or at least are familiar with these models and some of the questions that came from them for the next slide. And I just want to highlight a couple of the key takeaways from these recordings and presentations. The work we're doing right now for mobile crisis is really focused on aligning our current mobile crisis teams and future crisis teams to SAMHSA's best practices. Some of these best practices include using behavioral health professionals as the first line for a behavioral health emergency and reducing the use of law enforcement officers, first responders, and DCRs. DCRs do fill a very good role right now in our crisis continuum, but the best practice would be the mobile crisis team outreach first and then recommended DCR later. We are also working on integrating peers into teams. We have developed HCA has developed a peer crisis training. That pilot actually just finished up a couple weeks ago, and a full training will be offered again in this fall. This training will help peers looking to provide crisis services navigate the crisis system as well as self-care tools while they do so. We're also working on establishing new models for a place to go. We have crisis stabilization facilities and 23-hour models across the state. We are also working to align those to kind of the SAMHSA best practice for a place to go. The 23-hour models are kind of an alternative to emergency departments, as emergency departments tend to be a very less effective way for people to get help. They're very busy. People come in and out of rooms, and behavioral health emergencies require kind of that slowing down and meeting somebody where they're at and talking things through, which you can't always do in an emergency department. We're also looking at expanding peer respites. For those of you who are not familiar, peer respites are like a bed and breakfast where somebody would go and stay and receive intensive peer support on site. And it's kind of an alternative to crisis stabilization for people who want a different approach to it, as well as expanding the number of crisis stabilization facilities to reduce the stay at ENTs and improving the programming in these facilities to be more responsive and including follow-up. And there's still a lot of work to be done to ensure that there's statewide availability for these resources. These presentations kind of go into that into detail. Next slide. And one thing I want to note, we broke up adult services and youth services because it's really important, we think, to highlight that there's a big difference between the services we provide to adult and youth. With youth, we're often providing these services to not just the youth, but also the family or caregivers. So we are working on expanding and implementing the MRSS model, which is the SAMHSA best practice. It's a model that focuses on meeting the person where they're at and letting the caller or the person define the crisis and then making response in person a priority and relying less on phone services. We added 6 teams to make at least 1 youth team in each region. We are working on funding up to 8 weeks of in-home stabilization. In-home is preferred for adults, but especially for youth, that'll allow the youth to still stay with their friends, connect with their school, and continue as much normalcy as they can during their crisis while providing those supports to the youth and to any family involved. And then we also know that 1 in each region is not sufficient. So we are also working on expanding that statewide and figuring out the mechanisms to ensure that there is an appropriate adult and youth option in every area within a region. We're also working to incorporate these youth-based crisis services as a first response for parents and caregivers, also for schools, law enforcement officers dealing with youth, and call centers. And that's kind of a cultural shift, especially for people who have not had the ability to access crisis services in the past, where our first instinct might be to just call 911. Having another option there will take some time for people to build that trust that is a responsible option. We're also working on developing alternatives to EDs, similar to 23-hour models for youth, knowing that adult and youth might benefit from being separate, might not. That's still something we're working on. And then I just really want to highlight that youth crisis is complex. There's lots of considerations unique to this population that's very different from adult. That's one of the reasons why we kind of split these out to adult overview and a youth overview. Adult going through a crisis, maybe going through the crisis alone, they may have natural supports, they may be enrolled, but that's still going to be different from a youth who is going to have a lot of other complex social issues and stigma possibly going through this, as demonstrated by the lived experience earlier. And so I just wanted to highlight these to kind of put them for the CRIS committee. Again, if you have not seen those recordings, I highly recommend them. My team did a great job explaining the models and kind of the barriers and challenges we have to improving and implementing crisis services equitably across the state. Thank you, David.
Thanks. And I have in my notes that next up is Megan and Representative Orwell, but it looks like it might be Suzanne. Am I getting that wrong?
You know, I can cover mine very quickly. I know this group is very studious and has been studying this for about 1.5 years now.
Okay.
About a place, someone to come and a place to go. I just want to tie something Javi said at the beginning to the best practices document. She said, there's no one magic way, that there's multiple ways. And so I think that the best practice document that was sent out shows that there's lots of ways to think about how someone comes and about what the places are to go. And I think even the 1477 laid that out very nicely with peer respite and living room models and really push the envelope on what that continuum is within each one of those. So with that, I will pass it back, Jamie, and who's ever up next.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I just sent you a chat. I just really appreciated you referencing the story we heard from Javi at the beginning. I always like when we can tie back what we're talking about today to the stories that we hear. So next up, we have Megan Celedonia with the Governor's Office and Representative Tina Orwell to present best practices coming out of that Arizona trip that was, I think, back in April now. So not sure which one of you is starting.
I'll be starting today. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
And I think you all have the deck. So if you just want to advance one slide, I just have a couple of slides. Yep. There you go. And then I'll pass it on to Tina, and Representative Orwell, and she can take it from there. So we were asked today to share a little bit more about what we learned in Arizona. And we had talked at a few meetings prior about, just some immediate feedback after that trip. And that was good to hear. And then people were like, well, is there any meat? What did you learn? And so we just wanted to share a little bit more in terms of takeaways from that trip. I know in terms of background materials that HMA sent out some additional information on evidence-based practices, and some of that information shared a lot of detail about Arizona. So I think that's a good place to go. So these are just really impressions from my experience, and then of course from Representative Orwall. So a couple of things on this slide here. This trip was one of the first big things I got to do in my new role. I started in mid-April, and this trip was very early May. So it was a really great learning opportunity for me. One of the things that we noticed when we went over there was that if you look at that map on the right, our trip was focused on Maricopa County. And Maricopa County is I tried to, I went to Google and kind of pasted this in as an image. So most of that square minus a little bit to the left of your image where the dotted line is Arizona. With that little place in there, it's not really little, it's actually has just over 50% of the population. That's Maricopa County. So we really focused our conversation on Maricopa County for this trip. We were hosted by RI International, as I know many of you know. And one of the first things we did was visited their headquarters for learning sessions related to their Crisis Now model. And that would be learning more about those evidence-based practices and how they implemented them in Arizona. And then they talked a little bit more about funding and how they were using crisis codes and some billing strategies to try to get maximum reimbursement for crisis services. So that was really important to learn about. We did learn about what they call their RHBAs, or the Regional Health Behavioral Authorities. I think that's correct, and I'll talk about those in just a second. And that describes some infrastructure that they have in place to support coordinating services around mental health, behavioral health. We got to visit a call center and got to visit their mobile crisis outreach dispatch, one of their locations there, which was great. And then we also got to do facilities tours and looked at those 3 levels of care that they focus on there. And I know we'll talk about that in a minute too. So I think you can go ahead and go to the next slide there. And so when I got back, and again, I was kind of in learning mode. So I was just thinking about some of those features that we learned about in Arizona, and then tried to look a little bit more at, well, what are we doing in Washington? And so these are just broad brush, large kind of comparisons to share. And so their Medicaid program over there is called the Arizona Cost Containment. And similarly, they do integrated managed care, and they contract with, I believe it's 10 organizations to coordinate that care, similar to the way that we do it in Washington. But one of the unique features that they had that's worth mentioning is that Regional Behavioral Health Authorities, or the RBAs. And that was a lunchtime presentation that we had. And the thing that was unique about that was really that they had carved out that special population that if you were diagnosed with a serious mental illness, you got additional care and coordination. I guess not additional care, but additional care coordination to support you as you made your way through the system and accessed the services that you needed to. And so they also have the no wrong door policy, and those 3 levels of care that we got to visit were the 23-hour facilities, the short-term beds, and then the respite center. And 1477, as we know, we're going to hope to implement to more of a no wrong door approach as well. In terms of billing, this isn't really the best name for this category, but I was just trying to call out that we have some new things going on in Washington around 1688, which protects consumers against out-of-pocket network charges for emergency behavioral health crisis services. And we also are working on next day appointments through 1477. The self-funded plans are excluded from that 1688. I just didn't want to forget that. Insurers in Maricopa County are required to pay for mental health services equally with physical care. And so they try to bill insurers for as much crisis services as possible. And that was one of the things that RI was trying to educate us on. They will have a single statewide vendor starting in October 2022 in terms of their call center structure. And we have 3 NSPL centers. And then in terms of liability, they have a protection in their involuntary treatment law that if a provider was treating a person in crisis, if that person was to do harm upon release, either to themselves or another person, as long as they can illustrate that they did reasonable assessment and reasonable care while that person was there, they cannot be held liable for whatever happens after release. And that was a big business drive to allow RI to operate there. We don't have any similar liability protections yet in Washington. I shouldn't have said no liability, because I really don't know if there's nothing, but we don't have that in our involuntary treatment law right now. And then in terms of peers, they're making good use of that available workforce. That could be something that we look at differently in Washington. So I noted that there as well. So I'm going to pass the mic to Tina. Representative Orwell, thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. And again, I just have to do the shout out for Washington. We have an awesome 988 coordinator and a 911 coordinator, and we're a team. I was at a 911, a transformed 911, and they're doing awesome work like we are around 988. But it is very unique in our state that we've really made it a partnership. And so I want to thank you, Megan, and thank you, Adam, for that. Next slide. I do want to mention, though, on the liability, I guess before I talk to this slide, is that Senator Dhingra and I are looking at liability, and not only around what happens to a person during their care, but that whole transfer between 911 and 988 and the liability with that as well. But again, Arizona was incredible. I know it started out Senator Dhingra and I, with the help of Jen Stuber, we're trying to get a small team to go to Arizona, and it grew. And as you can see, we're a very large, wonderful team, and it was very exciting. And we had a lot of takeaways. I'm just going to mention a few, and then my next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're going to do it even better than Arizona, who we love very much. So the peer first model, I think they said 60% of the workforce of RI, were considered peers or had lived experience in the behavioral health system. I like that they used the term guest. I thought that was beautiful. If it's us, if it's our loved ones, I've struggled with mental health, I have family members, and so we all know how we want to be treated. And so I thought that was really lovely that, it's the guest approach. The no wrong door is something that's really important. I think that we have trouble in our system, even with inpatient beds, having access. And so the concept that there would be a very community-based place where you can take folks in is a big lift for us. And I think we have to look at what we need as we develop these models that have been beautifully highlighted of how we really actually make it a no wrong door. They did a lot of interesting things in Arizona about medical clearance. They did not, they could transport and not go to an emergency department, but go straight to the 23-hour facility. Again, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, the transportation. The coverage for the first 23 hours, one of the things we don't have in Washington State is the ability to actually support these 23-hour facilities. We do not have in place the operating and service dollars that really would make these centers robust and really be able to be no wrong doors. So I appreciate all the work as we look at Medicaid. I think it's going to take a big investment of state dollars, to make these things operational, because again, we don't want anyone not calling or not getting help because they're afraid they're going to get a big bill, right? We don't want that. We don't want those barriers. Next slide. So, one of the things, and I've had a Beatles theme this week, and Here Comes the Sun is the most downloaded Beatles song ever. I think 700,000 people have downloaded it, especially the last 2 years. So again, I think 988 is part of Here Comes the Sun, and everything's going to be all right. But to be a true companion, I believe between the 911 and 988 is we're going to need a rapid response. And I love the presentation that was done earlier. It's not about saying our DCRs, it's about a community-based, trauma-informed kind of healing response. But again, I think the timeliness is really important. But you know, think of our system as a funnel. So you have the 3 call centers. We know right now, I think 80–90% are resolved on the phone. We have something different in our state that I think we really need to highlight, which is next day appointments, crisis appointments on the Medicaid and private plan side, because there could be people who we think need help, and maybe they don't need an outreach team today, but if they were seen tomorrow, that would be rapid enough. And so that, again, is going to be part of our funnel. And then again, getting that team out there rapidly, I think within 15 or 20 minutes, it may be, you know, certain areas it needs to be telemedicine, but I think that response is going to actually be needed, or we're always going to rely on 911. Clinically driven, obviously we want the teams with people with lived experience. One of the things that came up in Arizona, and they have a beautiful model, and they have these receiving centers throughout the state, but I think it was 80% of the people were transported by the police, which is, you know, it's a great alternative. We have a lot of people sitting in jails that should not be, that have mental health, substance use disorders, but I think that's also very triggering and traumatizing. And so can we design a model, you know, tied to our crisis teams or EMS, whatever it looks like, where we can have other ways of getting people to help? You know, if that's our 23 hours, if that's emergency departments. I have the good fortune of going to Ireland this week, and they are transforming their mental health system. And what they have set up is a whole ambulance service to help people experiencing behavioral health. And they have found they've had a huge increase of need the last 2 years, and they have very high unemployment. But the motto of the ambulance service, let us be here for whoever needs us. Let us be here for our loved ones. Let us break the stigma. Let us support each other. Your mental health matters. You matter today and always. And so they really have this big campaign where they're really trying to just make it part of care, right? If you have a medical or behavioral health emergency, they're, you know, they come out. It doesn't really look like an ambulance. It looks more like a cabulance. But again, I look forward to kind of hearing what alternatives we have as we design the best system in the country. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Orwell. And we have a little time left to, oh, sorry, no, I apologize. This is going back to Suzanne.
Yeah.
Then we'll do Q&A.
We don't need to go back to that. We don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're good. You covered it. Okay. That's what I thought. Okay. Got a little thrown off. So let's stop the share for a moment. And we have actually a good amount of time for Q&A. So thank you, presenters, for being so concise and efficient in your presentations. Most of the questions were for Mark's presentation on claims and encounter data. So I'm going to read each question in the order I received it in the chat. Mark's going to answer. We're going to get through as many as we can before we need to move to our break at 4:50. So first question, Mark, is this research considering law enforcement response that could have been mobile response instead?
So at the moment, the answer is no. I wish it was, and I hope that it can be. So I think I'd like to hear from any of the CRIS committee members that know of potential data sources where this is at least, even if not totally complete, in some compiled way that we can incorporate that information, because yes, that is definitely a missing piece to the puzzle here.
Okay, so the call to action there is CRIS committee members, if you, or actually community members, I guess, if you know of any data sources that could help untangle the answer to that question about law enforcement response that could have been mobile response instead, please send it to Nicola Pinson. She will compile and get it to Mark, or you can send it to the HCA email. That might even be better, HCA email address on the website, which I'll post in the chat momentarily. All right, question number 2. Mark showed a chart that showed the relationship between mobile crisis team usage and designated crisis responder evaluation. Does this chart reflect that many or most designated crisis responder evaluations are done in hospitals without the involvement of a mobile crisis team? It would be interesting to know how many evaluations happen in the field versus happening in hospitals or emergency departments.
I agree. That's a very good point. So my understanding is that the DCRs that are dispatched to the hospitals are included in the counts that I showed you. But yes, the gap in the data, as I see it right now, is the place of service for both the DCRs and honestly for the mobile teams as well. I can share that in another state that Suzanne and I are working in, they are contemplating options and reimbursement, albeit different amounts of reimbursement for mobile teams delivered in the community where the person is versus maybe some community-based setting that's more of a centralized location, like an office, versus the ED. Obviously the ED being the least preferred, but the recognition by that state is that it's happening there too, both the mobile teams and the DCRs. So the place of service for all of these crisis-related services, I think, is a piece of information that we need to be collecting ongoing.
All right. So third question, do they track the last mental health-related service prior to accessing crisis services?
So we have explored that with the Medicaid data. We do have the data to report out on that. We have compiled information to be able to share that with you. We just didn't have enough time to do it today, but we are looking at services pre the crisis service in particular and post, and we're looking at it from categories, for example, emergency department use, primary care use, other mental health practitioner use, residential treatment, services, a variety of different types of services. But we can look at the continuum of pre, during, and post.
All right, fourth question. It sounds like the utilization data was not analyzed by gender. Is there a reason for that?
No particular reason. We certainly could report out on that in the future as well, but we have the data to do that.
Sounds like there might be some interest in that too. So
sure, happy to do that.
Wonderful. Okay, and then the fifth question is, I have a question about outreach attempts versus actual billed service. Build in air quotes, or not air quotes, those are my air quotes, build in quotes.
Yes.
I'm not sure if the follow-up is only counted if the encounter is tied to a specific CPT code.
It is. So for those not in the weeds on the data, so when we're looking at a database of services, the only available data we have when it's on a claim that a provider was paid for was obviously if a service was rendered, but clearly there are. That's what that one slide I had the nuance of was a follow-up appointment scheduled, which is different than was it scheduled and then the client actually presented for the appointment, because the first issue is just getting an appointment, but then like, did they actually follow through? So those that did not follow through, we do not have that data available in the current databases, but that could be a future data collection point, for related outcome measures if there was interest. I think these are the types of things that I think we're looking for the committee to help suggest, or a work group to kind of convene to suggest those types of outcome measures.
Okay, those are all the questions that were chatted to me. Jessica, I saw you raise your hand earlier. Did you have a question you wanted to throw in there?
I just wanted to respond to the question about location for crisis outreach versus DCR outreach, and just remind the group that oftentimes a crisis episode is a progression of outreaches. And so many of those individuals who are seen by a DCR in an emergency room may very well have been seen by a crisis team in the community, and it was determined that they needed that next level. Because someone has to be medically cleared in order to be placed, often that movement to an emergency room will be started so that they can be cleared and then referred to the DCR and placed. So it's not just one or the other. A crisis episode can include a lot of different elements.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I had some feedback from CRIS committee members that were shared via chat that I will also pass
I think you have another hand up, Jamie.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Claudia, thanks for catching that. Claudia.
I just want to follow up in the comment from Jessica. That's exactly what's happening in Vancouver. We run both the DCR and the mobile crisis. And by protocol, the mobile crisis come out first. If you are not able to manage the crisis, then you will be contact the DCR, and they will only provide the service at the hospital, because we are ruling out that we did everything at the mobile crisis level and it didn't work. So it is a progression. Both pieces are happening at the same time.
All right. Any other questions from the CRIS committee? Okay, since we have a little bit of time, I did have also a question from a community member that I think we have time to take, which is, where was these data collected? I think you answered that, but maybe you could just repeat that, Mark. That would be great.
Sure. There's two different main data sources. The one is the Behavioral Health Regional ASOs, as they're called. And so that means that each of the 10 regions has an ASO, so they each have their own database. So the HCA, the Healthcare Authority, is asking each of the regions to submit information back on these crisis services, but it's at a rolled up level, like a summary report. Whereas the more granular information, like the age of the client, the gender, the race, ethnicity, their location, those types of things, at least for Medicaid, that sits in the Medicaid database, where we know not only the crisis services and who received them and where, but that pre and post service as well.
Okay, I have a few questions coming in from community members, but I think what I'll do is I'll compile those and the team can take a look and see which ones we can follow up with answers on. In the meantime, Dylan.
Thank you. Mark, I was curious, because that was the one I was asking about, the outreach engagement, because I know under Siri for Medicaid, we do have that H0023 plus the HX modifier. I'm wondering, this is really only for Medicaid funded, but if there was something that we could help identify specifically for those outreach sites, because many times in my experience that, and I was also the one that asked around the services prior to accessing crisis service, is to analyze the gap between last served and then also the work that actually goes into trying to, get a hold and get in touch with either the patient or the family or someone else that can try to show that. So that's a big piece of missing data that I'm seeing here, and how we can sort of separate out the outreach versus the actual follow-up.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think I wanted to convey today that there's certainly a starting point to start informing the process for the unmet need, but there could certainly be other opportunities for further refinement of the data collection and the completeness of it. I mean, right now, as many of you know, for private insurance, a lot of this isn't even covered. So it's not that, well, we don't have the data, but there isn't any data to be had because they're not paying for it. So that's a gap. Then there's the Medicare population. And for those that have no insurance, the behavioral health ASOs are covering those services through other funding sources. And so they have that information, but kind of looking at it holistically, we only focused on Medicaid because that's the most robust database to date at the level of granularity from all those different subgroups that we could look at, just to give you some sense of what it is. But we don't have that for all the other populations in the state.
Kashi.
Thank you. Mine is more of a comment than a question, just that when we're looking at current state, it's really hard to count youth and when we look at data, and I think you mentioned this, but kids under 13 can't be ITA'd, and the video that Healthcare Authority did. Thank you for that. Shows the smiley faces of youth mobile crisis teams. I think there's only 4 or 5 in the state. And so I'm just wanted to name that I'm concerned they're undercounted. And I, Mark, you named that too, but I think it's important to just keep that at the forefront of our minds as we plan for them, that we probably don't have a current picture of the need among youth, especially those under 13.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Kashi. And I've compiled that and some of the other comments that came from Chris community members, which I'll share with the HMA team so they can incorporate that. We have time for maybe one more question. Any other questions from the Chris? I am thinking this is kind of a little miracle that we're finishing early on these. I was thinking we were going to go way over. So very well done, presenters and Chris committee. It's 4:45. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll use that 5 minutes we're ahead to have more time for a discussion with the Chris. So if everyone can be back on camera at 4:50, we'll dive into we'll set up the breakout discussion. So see you in a few minutes. Appreciate you catching that. Thank you. Okay, so Elizabeth, can you also share the questions that we're going to be asking in the breakout rooms, please? All right, and we're going to share those in your rooms too. You're going to have 20 minutes in your rooms to have this conversation, and then we're going to bring everyone back to the main room and do some debriefing. The community members, you'll stay in the main room and we'll ask these same questions here. So let's head off to our breakouts. I have 4:53, so let's plan to be back in this room at 5:13, and Brittany is going to send you a 5-minute and a 2-minute warning so that it doesn't surprise you. Oh, and just a quick reminder, so your room facilitators are Suzanne, Laura, Mark, and Michael. All right. Oh, and thank you, Michael. Michael, facilitators, please make sure you hit record when you go into your breakouts.
Jamie, how did you say to do that to the breakout rooms?
So if you click on share screen, and then click on advanced, you should see a little tab that says share with breakouts.
Yeah, I don't have that tab.
Oh, okay. It looks like maybe
it's an update.
Maybe it's an update. All right. Well, how about Brittany, can you text those questions or chat those questions into the chat room so that they have them in front of them?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Community members, welcome. Thank you. If you would like to participate in this discussion with me, please feel free to turn on your camera now. Brittany, it looks like Kimberly didn't make it into her room. Kimberly Hendrickson, if you could send her there. Awesome. All right. Welcome, everyone. So I know that many of our community members here also bring an understanding of the current state of crisis response in Washington and have some understanding of best practices. So I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this too. What are those missing pieces that we need to address to achieve our vision for a crisis response system? And let's start with the first question. What existing services, actually we can ask both questions at the same time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what existing services need to be expanded or what are some new services that need to be developed. And please use the raise your hand button if you have anything you want to contribute to this. Katie.
Hello there.
Hi.
Thanks for letting me chat. I am a lived experience, mental health, lived experience, substance abuse, lived experience, mom of a bipolar child, and lived experience of a high support needs, autistic, intellectual, developmental delays. So I am always working to see how any system that's coming about can be tailored for the community of families that have children, and then especially adult. We don't have hardly any services at all for adult crisis intervention for intellectually delayed, developmentally delayed, autistic, severe, challenging behaviors. And it's particularly hard when guardianship comes into play, and then when a lot of our loved ones are partially verbal or nonverbal, or they're so stressed that one of the things they lose is verbal abilities. And having someone to call that understands the nuances of, you know, if you're going to send somebody, please don't send the cops, because severe challenging behaviors looks like non-compliance, and they don't have the intellectual abilities to understand what that looks like. And then when they get stressed, violence is often what happens, and it's led to deaths, injuries. It's horrible. And then in addition, you know, just the tiniest things from lights and sirens coming are going to escalate the problem. We don't really have anywhere to go, in that sometimes when we take our loved ones to the EDs, they end up, we have limited access to them even as guardians. And so we've had several families be reported to adult family services for bringing them there, bringing our loved ones there. Several have been asked by a social worker if they would like to leave and go to a shelter, and they don't, you know, they're all going to say yes because they don't want to be at the hospital. And if we don't catch it before it happens, we don't know where they are, and they have no way to contact us. And so I'm just looking for any way that we can shoehorn how to deal specifically with this incredibly vulnerable population. Yeah. And it's getting harder and harder as we are rightfully closing institutions. We're doing it at a rate that we don't have any supports in place yet. So these are the same folks that are going from residential full-time living now to home because they don't qualify for supported living because they're too hard. And so crisis is coming and coming and looping and looping. Yeah. And we've had deaths, and it's been from suicides and deaths from family members being killed. And it's been devastating, especially in the pandemic. So whatever I can do.
Katie, that was so beautifully articulated. So I heard that a big missing piece are these specific services around someone to come and a place to go that are specifically tailored to and address the needs of people with intellectual or developmental challenges that don't present in the way that others might present. So thank you for that. And if you see me looking down, it's because I'm taking furious notes here. Thanks so much, Katie. I appreciate your contribution here. Next up is Jams.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jams. I speaking mostly from experience as a social worker, currently working with the Geriatric Regional Assessment Team in King County. That's based out of Sound Generations at this time. And I'm thinking about a lot of the older adults that I see and my team members see. We're an outreach team, and we meet people usually in their homes or wherever they're comfortable meeting. And then we try to partner with them to connect them to useful services or resources. And I would say a good number of the folks we're seeing are those who are dealing with some kind of cognitive memory issues, you know, could be diagnosed as a form of dementia or neurocognitive disorder, but sometimes people don't think that their issues are any different from someone their age, and it can be hard to kind of engage them in services. They're sort of denying that they need services. And so I'm thinking about how we end up having to turn to, sorry, I'm waiting for a bus to pass. We turn to adult protective services with like a self-neglect case. And so often that's not really able to go anywhere. In some instances, because there's, you know, some sort of mental health issues, behavioral health issues also involved, we've pursued crisis and commitment, again, grave disability. And these aren't really great options. I think it's just, we understand these are the options that are available, but I guess I want to say that there are definitely a lot of older adults dealing with some form of dementia. Obviously, that's not the only thing. There's usually complex health issues or mental health issues, behavioral health issues, dealing with different social, environmental issues, but not really having anyone to sort of engage with them on a regular basis at their home that could build a relationship in which somebody would maybe begin to consider accepting some form of services, some form of care or assistance. I just don't see that really happening without more involvement. You know, senior centers exist, but they aren't always set up to really work with people who are dealing with memory and cognitive issues quite the same way as sort of a general population. So that's what's on my mind.
Thank you, Jams. And that seemed like a kind of a little bit of a variation on Katie's point earlier about needing services that are specifically tailored for, in this case, older adults with cognitive or memory issues who may react differently. And also another theme that I heard you bring up is alignment or coordination with other services for older adults, so that it's not this kind of piecemeal approach that sounds like you're kind of having to rely on to support them. So thank you for raising that from your own personal experience with working with older adults. Cody.
Oh, yeah. So my name's Cody Main. I'm the community paramedic in Walla Walla. I'm also on the cross-system collaboration subcommittee. And, you know, my day in, day out deals with people, you know, in crisis, you know, both just from a behavioral health standpoint and also substance use. And yeah, I think one of the big things that I see is there's a difference between emergency room physician and a difference between a psychiatrist or a mental health professional. And I feel like we've gotten to the point where if people are going to continue to be taken to the emergency department, which I truly believe is not the best place for them, but if that's the only place that a community has or facility until one's built or whatever, I think we need to put the right people in those facilities to treat people. You know, medical clearance is a big deal. The emergency department physician can do that. But after that, there's no follow-up until a DCR comes in. And I think we have like one DCR on at a time sometimes. I think there's 5 that cover like 3 or 4 different counties around here. So having a mental health professional, whether it's like a nurse practitioner, psychiatric nurse practitioner, or something that's staffed in the emergency department, I think would be fantastic. With that being said, the post-discharge follow-ups for emergency department visits centered around mental health and substance use, just like the gentleman presented earlier, very few of those people get followed up with. So then we're just in this continual cycle of crisis with people because we don't follow up with them. So with that being said, though, also comes the point where now somebody is able to be detained, they meet criteria, and the DCR spends a huge amount of time searching for a bed throughout the state. And the first attempt that a DCR makes is probably pretty passionate, pretty vigorous. You know, they're wanting to get this person into place, and then they just repeatedly get denied for whatever reason until they finally have exhausted. And I'm sure that the last appeal to a facility wasn't as detailed, wasn't maybe as professional as the first, you know, and that's just, I think that's human nature. But I think one of the ways you can cut that out is if you were to take a model much like the National Interagency Fire Service. They have a facility in Boise, Idaho, and they monitor all the wildfires around the country. They know where all the resources are around the country, you know. So if you were able to have a hub that a DCR could call into and say, I got a person in Walla Walla, this is the criteria that we're working on, and then they just make the one call, and then there's a hub and all the other facilities have called into or given status on open beds or whatnot, or if they can accept COVID positive patients or whatnot, then it takes the workload of that DCR and it can be put somewhere else, maybe finding, going out and seeing somebody else. You know, they just spent countless hours searching for beds and are repeatedly told no most of the time. One of the other things I see is, I think HIPAA it's a good thing. Privacy is important, but I think that it's a barrier that is sometimes used for lackadaisical providers. So I think if you were to take and say, revise HIPAA to the point where it was much like a bank account, where I could go and I have to be authorized to withdraw some information or money from a bank account, right? I have to be a signer on that account or whatnot. But if I'm able to at least prove through a credentialing or prove through not just a release of information from the patient, but I'm actually part of a care team, I think that would be a good step.
Hey, Cody, I hate to interrupt you, but we just got the 5-minute warning, and I want to see if I can take a few other comments.
Then lastly, secure detoxes.
Okay.
Got to have that.
Secure detox. Okay, a lot of really good stuff in here, Cody. I've been taking copious notes here, so thank you for, and it sounds like a lot of this is also particularly important in rural areas. So thank you for sharing your experience from Walla Walla. Terry.
Hi, thanks, Jamie. My name is Terry Lee. I'm a child psychiatrist and adult psychiatrist and boarded in addiction medicine. I wanted to respond to your questions, but I also first wanted to really respond to Katie Omri's comments that really I've been in practice in our state for a long time. Decades, and I've really seen the services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities shrink rather than grow. And as we look at other state systems, I'd like to compare our state systems for, you know, our DDA to the equivalent of other state DDAs. You know, it's been a while since I looked at some other states, but when I last looked, you know, our services are underdeveloped. in my opinion. Again, I'm not trying to blame anyone. I know it's very complex, and DDA can only do what they're resourced to do, and they've, in my opinion, they've been stripped of resources, or at least had them reduced. As far as what services are needed or should be expanded, I do work with like kids with high behavioral health needs. And it's an alternative to inpatient hospitalization and residential treatment. So there's research supporting this, where there was one study done where kids were taken to the ED. This is an old study, about 20 years old. And an ER doc said, this kid needs to be admitted to the hospital for psychiatry reasons. Insurance approved it. And this program for intensive community-based services went in and did an evaluation and determined that the kid could go home. Now, I'm not saying we can just implement this tomorrow, but 80% of the kids went home that night after someone said they needed to be admitted, because they did a careful analysis of what led the kid to want to self-harm or end their life. And they could address this either by monitoring, creating some separation from the family member or whatever was disturbing them, and providing safety. I think like safety planning is underutilized in our state. Similarly, there was another randomized controlled trial that I was actually involved with that involved residential treatment, that we were able to reduce residential treatment, cut it in half. Again, by looking at why does the kid need to live away from home? Are there services that can be provided in the community that could keep the kid at home? Again, looking at why does the kid act out, become aggressive, become suicidal? So really looking at effective treatments for suicide, aggression, unsafe behavior. We need more of that in our state. There is some of it. Dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, can address a lot of these issues. I'm not saying it's the answer for everything, but again, it was developed here in Washington State, and there are many other good treatment providers that can address safety concerns and keep kids in the community and reduce the need for hospitalization. So I would just say that there are things that exist, including in our state, that could be expanded, and I think they would help with the crisis response system.
Terry, thanks so much for diving into those really great examples of opportunities to expand services that work. And I took some notes here. Meghna, before I come to you, I'm going to look at the chat here because I got a couple of chats in here. I got a comment from Dr. Barrero. Expansion is needed, initiation of medication-assisted treatment among providers who offer withdrawal management of opioid and alcohol use disorders, especially when someone is in crisis. And we got a reminder that it is election season. Our state housing improvements must be voted into law. Please remind everyone who cares, so much to vote, to give to candidates who care. Share with your group who the best candidates are to improve our state's behavioral health resources, and also laws to expand housing in all neighborhoods and mixed neighborhood models. Okay, I'm going to go back to the hands in the remaining few minutes we have here. So, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Meghna.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
I think I would quickly cover two areas that I think need improvement and people with mental health issues could benefit from. So I think one of the things, and somebody else also mentioned this, having some kind of a database that records the history of a person, the diagnosis, as well as, maybe the jobs they've held. And I'm sure some of these databases exist, but they just need to be connected, just like a EHR system within the hospitals. And the reason I say that is that a person in crisis can, be presented in a very different way versus a person who still has the same diagnosis, but could be thriving in society. And so I do think that kind of awareness and insight needs to be included in the training, particularly of the first responders, because they do carry a lot of burden of making the correct choice, and the choice or decision that they make for that person in a crisis situation can literally change the course of life of that person. So having that kind of training with first responders, in my mind, is very, very important. Yes, we need to expand services, but we definitely need to improve the quality of services that exist. So that's number one. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was access to community resources. So I'm talking from the point of view of someone who has spent time at a hospital and is discharged. So at the time of discharge, you get a list of community resources and they set up your first appointment with the doctor and all of that. So yes, community resources exist, they need to be expanded, but, and I think somebody mentioned this as well, there needs to be a bridge, because a person who has just, the person has not even recovered yet, but the person has just been discharged from hospital, is overwhelmed, even though there are community resources. How to connect to them, how to establish that access, in my opinion, is missing. And if you have family support, good for you. There are other people who can help you navigate and get proper access to community resources. But if you are by yourself and you know that you were at some point capable of doing well in society, doing the things that regular people do, get jobs, have children, but now because of this particular diagnosis or condition that you're in, and because of lack of treatment at the right time, because of poor decision making, that just makes the problem worse.
Meghna, thank you so much for your contributions here. And I wanted to just make a note too. Cody mentioned data earlier as well. You were talking specifically about integrating data about the individual so they can be better served. And I was reflecting on Cody talking about data regarding beds and availability nationwide to help save some of the providers' time that they can spend on working with folks directly. So wanted to just note that there's that interesting overlap. We have our breakout room participants coming back, and I'm sorry, Bonnie and some of the folks who put notes in the chat that we aren't getting a chance to get to your comments. Bonnie, if you could put your thoughts in a chat, that would be great, because we're going to record that and then I'll compile that and make sure that it gets to our CRIS committee members. Or I can share it in the report out. CRIS committee members, thanks for coming back. Elizabeth, maybe, great, perfect. Hope you had some good discussions in your room. We're gonna do a debrief now. Let me just pause. Nicola, anyone else who's signed up to make public comment? I'm just wanting to manage the time here.
I have not received any further requests.
Okay, so folks, if you are interested in making a comment today, please send a chat to Nicola. I'm gonna start using up the time we have for public comment if she doesn't get any, so that we can continue the CRIS discussion. So if you could send one to her now, that will help us manage that public comment time. Let's do a debrief. So I'm going to call on each facilitator to share some of the highlights from their room. I'm going to ask folks in the room to build on or add to that if there's anything that was missed. And then I'm going to ask the next facilitator to build on what they heard from the previous room. And then time permitting, I want to share some of the really great insights we got in the main room here. So why don't we start with Suzanne's group. Suzanne's okay if I pick on you first? I should ask you first. You know what, I'll tell you the order so that our facilitators know when they're going to get called on. So I'm going to pick on Suzanne first, and then Laura, and then Michael, and then Mark. So you'll know when you're coming. All right, Suzanne.
Okay, first, great conversation. I mean, it went to a lot of places that were very, very important. And I also want to just mention having Puck in our group and her bringing us back to the realities of like what's needed by people, like in the moment. And so I just want to say, Puck, thank you so much for grounding us in the realities. We talked about that the questions were what to expand and what to add, but we talked about the challenge, like regardless of the question, there's challenges that have to be overcome and we have to come up with strategies to overcome them. One, funding, and certainly there's lots of work that's being done around that realm. One of the suggestions too is also to be thinking about what the CCBHCs bring to the table, but also the CMS guidance that has come out for the expanded FMAP for mobile crisis.
Suzanne, I apologize for interrupting you. Would you mind spelling out the acronyms for folks that may not be familiar with those?
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, CCBHC, you know what? I don't even know the right term, but Certified Community Behavioral Health Centers. Okay, and then also CMS's, the Center for Medicare and Medicare Services of the federal government just issued some guidance to say, states, you can get more money for your mobile teams. And I do know that HCA is in the process of working through that. So just bringing us some more information with that. So the challenge is one, funding, there's lots of work on that. Second one is the significant workforce challenges that everyone is having, is that we need to really dive down and have some strategies about that. And that relates to the whole thing about being able to use not just the high level professionals, is really shaking things up and bringing it to allow paraprofessionals, including the use of peers, and how important that is, particularly in someone to come, that peers are part of that. We talked about telehealth and how can telehealth be part of this, and actually part of this CMS, the federal government. The recent publications that they put out and talks about how telehealth can be incorporated into mobile, so you can have like a peers going out and this higher level person is sitting somewhere else by telehealth. And so there's strategies that can be worked on to enhance the workforce. We talked about also thinking about what is the role of EMTs that could be used on mobile teams. Looking through my notes here real quick. Strong emphasis on the finance, so not just getting the money in, but the modeling of the model for reimbursement needs to strongly consider the firehouse model. Like, we don't ask how many police interactions happened last week, so we know how to pay you. It is, we know you had police officers in the street. We know it costs money. It's the same thing for mobile response. So there was a lot of conversation about overcoming the challenges as opposed to just what types of services. But the conversation was, let's get out of our box of what we've known to start doing other things.
Love that. So some needs for creativity around funding, and creativity especially around workforce and how we meet those workforce needs. And that is consistent with what I've heard from folks in this group over and over about having to be more creative in addressing our workforce needs. So thank you for that, Suzanne. So Laura,
I want to ask the group, did I forget?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. I was just charging ahead there. Appreciate that. So folks who were in Suzanne's room, anything to add or expand upon from what Suzanne shared?
I remember two more things.
Oh, okay.
Respite, like not high level intensity crisis services. Not everybody needs that. Peer run, people who are peers running it, providing it, and they're already out there, and start paying them for the infrastructure that's there. They weren't counted in those numbers, but they're out there doing it for you. So use those kinds of entities. And then there was one other one about and somebody remind with like the kinds of organizations that already exist out there. They may not be doing crisis services right now, but they are set to be part of the delivery system. And I can't remember the organization was the example, but maybe an LGBT community organization, grassroots.
So leveraging existing organizations.
Existing organizations. We don't have to create new ones. They're out there. It's getting them involved in the system.
Wonderful. Suzanne, I think you clearly did a good job capturing everything because no one's adding to it. So I'll move on then to Laura's room. Laura.
Hi, everyone. Okay. And team, please feel free to chime in if I missed anything. Generally, the consensus was, generally overall, there's not enough mobile crisis and CSU models available by region, but also we don't want a cookie cutter approach. The needs are different by region, really for the entire continuum of care. So really being thoughtful about what sort of models are specifically needed and how should they be staffed. There was a discussion about response times, and we were looking at the best practice document, and even their response times, they're still struggling with their, reaching their targets, and that's so important with mobile crisis, especially. And there was a comment about, the SAMHSA model of mobile crisis has, it's 11 people, one team to cover basically 24/7, and that's just not enough. We're discussing that it should be more like a response to a medical crisis. There should always be someone available. Only one team available for a region or an area is not going to cut it in terms of, again, that response time and meeting the need of that person. A lot of discussion about, the whole concept, the whole model is a diversion model, right? Mobile crisis and the CSU model is, and just making sure that, thinking about the fact that we really do want to not have law enforcement be the first response, but, only if needed sort of thing. And a really good discussion about resources, like what do what does a mobile crisis team need? What does the CSU team need? What do the DCRs need to divert folks? So what resources do they need to be able to access? An NDA or, real-time SUD treatment. And there was a conversation about what was written into the True Blood contracts, and, there's available beds at detox, shelter beds, same-day assessments. And just thinking about what resources do we want to not only provide downstream, but upstream, like more preventative resources as well. Just again, with that eye on that less restrictive alternative. Discussion about that. I think we talked about the peer respite model. Suzanne, you've already mentioned that was in the best practices, but clubhouses, drop-in centers, assistance with transportation. And then we ended with making sure that we're also, putting funds into training. If it's, peers, whoever it is in terms of the workforce, that they're competent, they're culturally competent. And so just really reinforcing training around skill building to work with this population. What did I miss, you guys?
Anything to add from Laura's group?
Daria.
This is Daria. Laura, I don't think that you missed it. I just really felt the need to really underline Jan's comments about trying to get the resources that DCRs and crisis responders need into the community to prevent having to use the Involuntary Treatment Act and prevent that more restrictive services. So I really thank you, Jan, for saying that. And I really, really just wanted to underline that.
Thank you for that, Daria. Anyone else from Laura's group have anything to add? Okay, nice synthesis, Laura. All right, I think I can't remember if I said Michael or Mark next.
I think you said me, and I'm ready to go.
All right, Michael, go for it.
So I know people have already mentioned mobile crisis response, but our group talked a little bit more specifically around, so definitely being concerned about needing to further develop the mobile crisis response system, but specifically grounded in community, right? So really kind of focusing, how do we get, peers in particular to be a part of those teams? how do we make sure that we have mobile crisis response teams for youth, young populations, but also older adults or geriatric populations, recognizing that they have some unique needs and health issues that they may be facing. So how do we expand mobile crisis response for those populations? We also had quite a lengthy talk about interpreter services. So ensuring that the interpreter services system is robust enough to handle the diversity of need, especially looking at the data that was provided. Do we have interpreters that speak all the various languages? Talked about the nuance of some of the kind of recent immigrant populations where it might be harder to find an interpreter that speaks a specific language, or challenges with really small communities where there might be kind of confidentiality or privacy concerns. And so folks don't necessarily want a member of their community to interpret for them, but is there an interpreter who isn't a part of the community that also speaks their language? And then also talked about, how do we ensure that staff, not just interpreters, the interpreter system is robust, but how do we ensure that staff are trained to navigate interpreter requests efficiently and respectfully, right? So that we can get folks connected. Again, expansion of peer services was a big thing. And then the group also talked about we need to kind of expand our understanding or identify what success looks like for these systems and how we will know. And so really kind of this idea of what information do we need in order to figure out where we need to put our efforts, and then how will we measure that as a kind of expansion of focus, right? Identifying success and measures for that. There was acknowledgement that this might not be new in all areas, but that the expansion of behavioral health walk-in clinics for anyone, regardless of insurance or payer, that's available 24/7, and both in the private and public kind of funded systems, right? And that folks can get what they need, maybe even walk out with medications that day and appointments the next. People talked about the need for support for those next day appointments. So next day appointments aren't new, but having kind of a program to support ensuring folks get to those next day appointments, because there's a big no-show rate. So whether that's calling and checking in, helping arranging transportation, accompanying someone to those next day appointments, but how can we make sure folks are getting to those next day follow-up appointments? We also talked around just kind of still being a little bit concerned about the youth system, and how do we make sure that, what those teams look like, that they are interfacing well with K-12, and that they are appropriately trained. And so just kind of emphasis there. And then also the need for new or more or additional programs for parent and caregiver support, especially during the crisis, how to navigate that and how to support their family member through that.
That was a lot you covered. Anyone else from Michael's room, anything to add or expand? Facilitators, you're doing a great job capturing everything. Thank you. All right, last is, well, not last, because I'll throw in some of the big insights from the main room. So next up is Mark.
Thank you. So maybe it was because I was the facilitator and I'm known as the data guy. So my group focused a bit on that, and I appreciated that. So from a big picture standpoint, I think there's been an acknowledgement that there's a lot we still don't know, and there's a lot of missing data. Specifically, mobile teams that are being dispatched from law enforcement. So Ron is kind enough to work with me offline to figure out solutions about how we can better capture how much that's actually occurring today. Crisis stabilization services statewide was brought up yet again as a significant concern. Another item that came up is now that the 988 lines are going to be launched, what will happen next for someone to come and a place to go? And the concern that was resonated was, what will happen in the hospital EDs? Are they going to be overrun because there are regions of the state where there is not someone to come or a place to go after the call is made to 988? Another kind of realistic recognition is that there have been significant strides in the last couple of years to help fund these services, but the gap is wide. So encouraging the committee to think about how to strategize how, when funding becomes available, how to deploy it, and also what might other opportunities there be beyond what has been used thus far to help fund these services. And then more specifically, a concern was raised that although there's been a lot of conversation about the need, a little more attention to the rural areas and making sure we don't lose sight of the rural areas, even though there's fewer people, the need is quite great and the workforce is a challenge in that area. And then specifically for youth, I mean, amongst the many populations that others have mentioned, sometimes it's not just a place to go, but a place to go that will accept youth, whether it be certain age groups or particular individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities or other types of groups within that youth population. So just because it's a youth program doesn't mean it's a youth program for all youth. I think those were the key items from my group. Anyone else have something to add that has not been mentioned?
Okay, sounds like you covered it really well, Mark. I just want to share a few things that came out of the main room conversation. We had a number of people contribute from their own experiences personally and professionally. So a couple of key themes to build on what we've heard from our breakout groups. A real need to tailor services, someone to come and a place to go, to families with children and adults who are intellectually or developmentally delayed. And this can be particularly complicated by a lack of verbal abilities, which can present as non-compliance when law enforcement officers are involved. Similarly, older adults with cognitive or memory issues, that can also be really challenging in these situations, and so need some tailoring for that. Got a lot of really good insights on emergency departments and the importance of, if those are going to currently continue to be a place that people in crisis are going, even if that's not ideal, in particularly in rural communities where there aren't a lot of options, having the right people in those facilities. So for example, a mental health nurse practitioner. Other thoughts, HIPAA can be a barrier in terms of getting the kind of information you need to address concerns or challenges. There was an idea, this is building on some of the data stuff that I've heard other groups talk about, to have some kind of database that monitors all resources around the country for beds, which could really save the DCR time that they could spend on caring for folks in crisis. Let's see. Oh, we heard a little bit about diversion also, and an opportunity to expand more diversion opportunities, similar to, I think, one of the other rooms talked about. So in particular with young people, just sometimes some separation or an opportunity to monitor or safety planning. Those are all strategies that may prevent a young person from having to go further into the crisis response system. So that's just a snippet of what we heard in the main room. I've also got some chat stuff that we're going to save and share with all of you, but a lot of really good feedback, I think, to build on in September. Just some quick synthesis here. I heard groups talking about funding and workforce being really big challenges, and that we really need to take some creative approaches to this and set ourselves up to be able to respond when funding opportunities arise, so we can deploy those, we can capture and deploy those. Heard a lot about expanding or leveraging opportunities to divert and prevent people from entering the crisis response system in the first place, including leveraging community resources, and then a lot of support for making that happen, need for more support for making that happen. And then finally, something I heard across the groups is targeted services, particularly for youth, older adults, and rural areas. Anything else that anyone wants to add to this conversation? So next steps here, we're going to summarize all this in a meeting summary, which you will get in advance of the September meeting, where, as I said before, we're going to do a deeper dive into best practices and set ourselves up for providing some recommendations toward the end of the year. So that's what's happening next. Thank you so much for your engagement on all of that and for processing all of that information that you got in the presentation earlier and turning it into some great thoughts about what are our missing pieces and what should we consider expanding or adding. Kimberly.
Thank you, and I'm so sorry to have missed the breakout rooms. I was called away, so I just wanted to suggest a couple of things by way of additional data sources that might help us assess state crisis usage and unmet crisis need. In terms of first responders, both from police and fire, the Gelada platform is being used by at least 20 different departments in Washington State. Happy to follow up with your team or Mark in specific about how you might be able to work with Gelada to capture information about what fire and police are doing in terms of crisis in Washington. Apologies if this has already been said. I know other people on the call have an interest in measuring what's happening in our emergency rooms, but I know that there's a great deal of data that's already being collected about how many psychiatric emergencies or how much admission in our hospitals in Washington State is related to psychiatric distress. I sure would like to see that as a metric that we're considering when we're looking at our data. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Kimberly. And we'll summarize everything that came out of the breakouts, so you can catch up. And again, if you have anything to add after, we'd love to hear it. All right, let's do action items and next steps. And then we have one person who signed up for public comments. We'll move into that once we do action items and next steps. There is, I know there might have been a little bit of confusion. There is going to be a steering committee meeting next week on July 20th from, Nicola, can you remind me the time, 1 to 2:30? Do I have that right?
Exactly. That's
okay,
right.
So that agenda should be going out tomorrow afternoon and the information posted up on the website. So Puck, would you like to share information about the lived experience subcommittee tomorrow?
Yeah, lived experience subcommittee. We don't need anyone to sign up. If you have lived experience, you're welcome to show up. I was going to post the link, but I cannot. So maybe I'll send it to Nicola, and Nicola can share the link with people. It's from 3 to 6 p.m. tomorrow. We're going to be talking more about these gaps. Please share. Everyone is welcome.
Perfect. Thank you, Puck. I think that's it for action items and next steps. Nicola, anything that I missed that we need to share?
That's it, everyone. Thank you.
All right, so let's move into public comment. We've had one person sign up. We still have 17 minutes left. So members of the community, if anyone else would like to make a public comment, please send Nicola a chat now and we'll take as many as we can. Before we start it, I just want to share the guidelines for making a public comment on the screen. Forgive me, and there we go. All right, so since we only have one person, I will, unless anyone else signs up, I will not use the timer, but I will ask that one person stick to roughly 2 minutes to speak, just in case anyone else signs up. So you can ignore the strictly enforced right here. Let's see, as I said, oh, I can skip this next one too. Actually, you know what, since we only have one person, none of this is particularly relevant. So I will just stop the share. And Katie Omri has signed up to make a public comment. So Katie.
And Jamie, I just received an update from Katie that she is not able to speak to her comment directly or verbally, but I can, either we can read her comment or I can add it to the chat.
Nicola, yeah, if you don't mind reading it and adding it to the chat, if that's okay with Katie, that would be lovely.
Yes, I just need to.
And I could be able to do it. It's just that my son just came home, so it could be really, really loud from his caregiver. So it might just get super loud, or it might be quiet.
Katie, we're happy to do whatever feels best to you.
Okay, thank you so much. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we that there is clear public comment about the need for, as you said, that we talked in our breakout group, tailored services for dealing with crisis stabilization, crisis response, crisis prevention, specifically for children and adults that have either a disability diagnosis, specifically for autism, nonverbal, intellectual disabilities, throw a huge additional burden on what it means to get crisis stabilization for this group. And, you know, right, most of these children and adults are covered under DDA, but DDA doesn't currently have a crisis stabilization service, or it's not happening. We're not really sure. We have families who have called a DDA crisis number. We had one family that did that, and a year later, they got a referral for the mobile crisis team. So that's a year, and they were in pretty severe crisis, ended up in the emergency room, boarded for quite a bit of time, no safe discharges. We as guardians and some of us that have supported decision-making, we just need to really be a part of that process. A lot of times if we have adults, once they hit a system, so whether that be in a hospital, in an ED, in any sort of like residential rehabilitation center, psych wards or anything, we often lose access to them. And there have been a lot of cases where choices have been presented to them if they wanted to leave and go to a shelter. If one of us were unfortunate enough to have our loved ones say yes, I don't really even know what would happen in that case. Many of us have adult protective services called on us while we have our kids boarded in hospitals. And as we see institutions are rightfully closing, we're so excited about the fact that we're going to have more community inclusion and a community living, but we don't have supports happening in the community and in a home in place as fast as this is happening. So what's happening is we've had more families go into crisis without intermediate care facility beds available. And most of these folks are stuck at home because they don't really qualify for supported living because they need much more support, higher supports than that. Also, just a note, 70% of individuals that experience autism may have or likely have an additional mental disorder, and 40% may have 2 or more in addition to that. So you throw in med management, you throw in dysregulation, you throw in what a 300-pound, 22-year-old, super active, highly high behaviors, severe behaviors, trying to manage not wanting to die, because some of them will have the language to say, I want to die, I want to die. That looks really scary to someone who's responding. And so there's a lot of fear associated with families calling any sort of emergency services for fear that our family members are going to look non-compliant or unsafe. So thanks for the ramble. I'm really glad that it didn't get really loud at the same time, but just if we could integrate with DDA, if we can make sure we have providers available, make sure that we're thinking about this community, we would be so thankful. So thank you.
Katie, thank you so much. And if you wouldn't mind, it sounds like you already gave the written version to Nicola, so we have that. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, it looks like you'll get a few minutes back in your evening. So since Betsy's not here to say farewell to all of you, I will attempt to channel her again. Thank you so much for all of your engagement today, as ever. I feel like we came out with a lot of really good insight to factor into our conversations in September. If I don't see you at a subcommittee beforehand, I wish you all, if I don't, or at the steering committee next week, I wish you all a really happy, healthy, lovely summer. And we'll see you in early fall. Take care, everyone. Thank you.